Right, so welcome to the Thursday, December 8th, 2022 FoodOn Curation meeting, and we've got a working agenda here. I'll just start off with a little bit of news, and then I think we'll go to choice items, and then just a little round of feedback would be appreciated from Magali and Emma, I think, on our animal hierarchy. So first off is the news that I had to talk with the Envo curators, Pierre Buttigieg, mainly on Monday. It's been a long-standing thing that FoodOn is tucked underneath fiat object. It's tucked in the moment under Envo, under material entity, fiat object, environmental material. And then finally you get down to food material and then the whole product hierarchy. And that's like so obscure to most people. So we've got permission, and I've made it happen yesterday, to move food material directly under material entity.
I feel like Damien's been waiting for this for a long time.
Yes. So, and that in combination with COB, integration with COB and dropping BFO, will mean that FoodOn is offered to the world, and you will see right away at the top level material entity, process, and information and characteristic, and then right into it. So much more accessible. So that'll all roll out. I'll try to get COB integrated before the end of January. And we will be one of the first Hobo Foundry ontologies to jump in on COB. Yeah, and so a little bit of a bleeding edge move, because COB is at the moment still finalizing things like taking on OB device. I was just working on the definition for that right now. and working on some new process terms. But that's all good. Keeps us on our toes. That's my news. So over to you, Troy.
Great. Well, good morning, good evening, everyone. I've got two topics that I'd like to discuss. I thought maybe I would do the super short version of each of those and then yield the floor to others for the session on animals and whatever else you want to do. And then if there's time permitting, I've got some sort of follow-on and deeper stuff we can discuss, but I'll keep it brief for starters. My first topic has to do with creating new entities for apple cultivars. As a way of orienting to the FoodOn organization and the ontology, I just sort of took it on myself to try and create, some new terms in an area that I just thought would be a fun little side project. And so I said, why don't I try and populate FoodOn with all of the known varieties of apple. There are some in there now, a half dozen or so. And I thought, what about just all the rest, at least as far as Wikipedia knows? And so that's been a little exercise to teach me about the robot template and about sourcing and how we annotate things and so forth. And I've got my first draft. So I've created a populated robot template, but hey man, I'm a newbie with this, and so I'm sure I've done a bunch of things wrong. I'm not sure what happens next with it exactly, and I'm wondering if somebody might be willing to just work with me a little bit, be a sort of mentor with this small project to just help me get it right, get it uploaded, that kind of thing. I think what I'm asking for concretely is a couple of 30-minute meetings with someone on whatever schedule works for you. I'm not sure who the best person is, but I guarantee my questions are going to be the kind that probably anyone on this call could answer, because it's really like, first time through kind of stuff. How do I populate this? Where do I put the file? Is this kind of, is this format for the cell correct? Stuff like that. So that's my first thing, is just a request for someone who might be able to work with me on that.
Yeah, great. Of course, I'm happy to step forward. It's wonderful to take on that project of greater Wikipedia integration. So I can see that happening for apple, for maybe pears, for wine, grape varieties, all territory we wanted to.
Just a question. What is a cultivar? Is that a material entity specializing apple, or is that a quality of what?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really. Yes.
You're asking about the definition of the word cultivar, right?
Yes. Where to place it in the hierarchy?
Yep. So in general, this word cultivar is used to mean something like subspecies. Yeah, different flavors of things, as you probably know. My hunch would be, therefore, that these in our taxonomy are treated as subclasses within apple. So just different kinds of apple, basically. They're not treated as an ingredient in an apple. They're not treated as a derivation of an apple. It is a whole thing. It's just that within that whole thing, apple, there's this kind and this kind and this kind.
I agree with that. Yes. Okay. Of course. Yes. But because just about the definition, it is not exactly the same. A cultivar is not exactly the same as in a taxonomy. This is not the same as a variety, you know, the subclasses, the subspecies level in a taxonomy does not refer to the same, exactly the same thing. I think so. I don't know exactly, but I think there is a difference. No, you don't know the...
So here we get from my short question, can I work with someone, into the deeper question of actually starting to do the work together. And this is one of a variety of things, like where do we place this, right? What is the parent class for these things? And I've got other questions about other axioms that may or may not need to happen. How do we handle the examples that are already in here, as Damien's showing us, right? So it's actually a replace function rather than just an add, or an edit function to add extra attributes potentially to some of these existing. This is all the stuff that I would need to work through with someone. I have ideas about all this, but I may not be right.
Yeah, so it touches on actually creating a general food product template for any species of food or genus of food. And the current approach that's in FoodOn is that we define a whole apple and then get into all of the subspecies or cultivars without necessarily naming them as cultivars, and certainly not putting them as subclasses of the NCBI taxon apple varieties. But
yes, as far as I remember, you say that the link to the taxon will be only at the apple world level.
Right.
Okay. I think it's much more simpler like that, because otherwise it is a pity to know what genotype it refers to.
Yeah, but so far, so there's our in taxon some Malus domestica. But now Troy's project opens up this notion, do we just have apple cultivars here? And the crazy thing about apple trees themselves is that they're often spliced. So they're actually two genetic organisms living in or more. I have one with 5 different branches with 5 different apple cultivars on it. So in a way, you can only say apple whole is in taxon some Malus domestica, and only this definition actually allows for an apple tree to have 5 different varieties on it, believe it or not. So we're sort of in luck there. But do we go through the whole effort of actually offering up a species over on our hierarchy here? Do we have the 900 apple variety species here, or do we just content ourselves with the 900 apple varieties listed right under apple whole? I would think that a first move anyway is to put all the apple varieties, apple whole, under here, and skirt adding to NCBI taxon all the a subspecies.
I would think so too. I mean, I think our interest here is in primarily deepening the catalog of foods, and we're less concerned with pushing the botany.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And of course, that doesn't address whether like some particular apple varietal, what its genetic makeup is, and whether it might be confused with some other varietal in some other part of the world. But we'll just set that aside. Okay, well, if we're no objections to that, sticking with that strategy, then it'll be pretty easy to talk to you, Troy, about your robot table. And
okay, thanks in advance, Damien. Well, I'll set up time separately for us to do that.
Okay.
Great. Second topic has to do with the group running the Gene EpiDB. So this is an ontology and associated database around epidemiologics, genetic epidemiology. They asked for some new food terms because they want, for example, they want to be able to track populations that have been breastfed until age of X and then switched only to baby food, and after that had exposure to undercooked meat and all kinds of things. So they want to be able to point at entities in FoodOn, and in some cases they were missing the thing to point at. For example, we don't have, as far as I can tell, something right now called dark leafy green vegetables. We have some things that are close, but not quite that one. We don't have something called foods rich in vitamin A, et cetera. So there's a handful of terms that they would like us to, they've asked us to create. I'm working through that. And the high level questions for this group, I've got two. The first is, do we have a minimum set or a best practice set? I think this is getting back to the template idea you just said, Damien. Do we have a minimum set or best practice set of the attributes which we should populate when we create a new food? Label, description, parent class, anything else? So I'm just wondering, you know, what is the thing I should, what's my sort of my patriotic duty, my standard of quality I should be adhering to if I'm going to mint or ask someone to mint a new entity. And in this case, let's focus on a new food. All right, so I'm not talking about adding a new chemical or a food component like fortification, but really like a thing you could put in your mouth.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, we've just been running with the General Lobo Foundry requirements for the label, definition source, but we had not gotten around to writing the SOP on extra info axiomatization of more specific food branch terms.
You said label, definition source. We also should include at least one parent class, right?
Parent, for sure. Yeah, for discussion. And if there are more than one parent, then that's where we have to figure out which one is the primary and which other ones could possibly be inferred, and how to get into that. But none of that's been formalized.
Okay, good.
Now,
What I'm
to add on to that, though, now there is pressure from the periodic table of food and from agro to actually describe biosamples better. What are the qualities of the sample? Is it raw or fresh or cooked? And so that was my next mission, to actually add documentation about biosample. And there may be a crossover there to what you're talking about, because some kinds of food have had processes applied to them. And so how far is FoodOn going to describe that this food item you're entering is a cooked food and was previously frozen and whatever, or partially cooked?
Okay. One example of that they've asked for is, in essence, baby food. So they're looking at what kids eat before they're able to chew. And so this is like, food which is not solid, or food which is semi-solid, liquids and semi-solids, foods, things like that. It gets to what you're talking about.
So
Damien, I think if I make that just a little bit more abstract, and I was going to ask about this. So we talked about the sort of most minimal attributes needed in order for a thing to realistically or practically exist in our catalog. So label, definition source, and parent class. Then presumably we would like to have as many axioms, additional attributes, relationships as are relevant, as are true. But they're like, it's limitless, right? There's a long tail of extra work you could do. For example, dark leafy green vegetables, I could go and create the thing, just find the best place to stick it. But then I could also work to associate it to all of the vegetables and the leaves of those vegetables where it applies, right? So that the term has some practical meaning. Otherwise, it exists as an entity, but it's not practically usable as a category which really has links to all the different vegetables, which are dark leafy green vegetables. I'm assuming, check me on this, that this sort of as many axioms as is practical. That's our rule of thumb right now. Do it if you can, but you don't have to, because it's a lot of work, right?
It's work, and as Chris Mongell has pointed out, some people over axiomatize. They think they've got some kind of input that has this kind of a characteristic, or an output, and then realize that the axiomatization should have shifted off to detailing what the inputs and outputs are and giving them their own classes, say. So you end up with this morass of different modeling approaches. So yeah, it's sort of dangerous territory to start really axiomatizing. So, but the simple stuff, like that something's an output of a certain process, and that was the most immediate precursor process, that's sort of safe.
Well, I mean, like an example here with dark leafy green vegetables is it could have a link to vegetables. It could have a link to leaves, right? Because those are definitionally correct. But at the moment, I don't think that we are obligated. We don't hold ourselves to that standard necessarily when we create the thing. And therefore, we do run a risk that I create a thing called dark leafy green vegetables. I tell these guys it's a thing, but it doesn't go anywhere. Like their processing will never yield anything if they point at that thing.
Yeah, exactly. The querying promise leads one to expectations that aren't there.
Yep. Okay, great. Last question quickly has to do with the work that others are doing on processing. Maybe, Damien, you're going to give us an update on this later, but I know that some people are doing work on food process and what's the vocabulary for that and so forth. I was just curious what the status is of that work, that module. Is it gradually getting uploaded into FoodOn.owl, or is there intended to be a sort of internal release of this when we'll see it?
Great. Okay. So that tells me, suggests to me, emphasizes. Trini and I created a paper. We submitted it to one conference and it was accepted, but then the publication fee just being the proceedings was outrageous, and it wasn't actually a target community that would lap this stuff up. It was big data, food, yes, food and big data, but it was all about machine learning stuff. And so I'll ask Trini if we can circulate it around for you guys' comment. It lays out what would be a new FoodOn food process hierarchy. And it's something Trini will be pitching to the USDA too. So Kai, you're more than welcome to liaise with her and I on that.
So Damien, the status is then that she's done the thought work on it and she's pitching a funder so that we can build it in properly.
So the paper is proposed, just names on paper, in diagram.io for food processes, and we were going to go through a round of feedback to see if we should adjust that. We'd been talking with the USDA for a couple of years about this stuff, and it's work that both she and I have done. I've helped her sort of oboify, and we've done a lot of back and forth. And Magali is, even seen from a year ago, the big process hierarchy that this is all stemmed from. So the FoodOn robot tables has a process tab, and we are going to be adding and have started to add all of the new proposed food process categories to that. And they're mostly
do you mean, sorry, do you mean that you will replace the existing hierarchy, process hierarchy, imported from Langual, or do you mean you will add something?
Well, it'll be an addition process, but there'll be a shuffling of all the existing process categories into this new scheme for the most part. The big distinction is between food processes by objective and by mechanism. So one can have an objective and select different mechanisms to get there. But yeah, really, really appreciate your feedback on this paper. So I'll ask her today, and we'll send it out later today or tomorrow for your feedback. I was hoping for the conference to be kind of a feedback place, but in the end, I think we're going to submit it to Foundation, Springer's Journal, Frontiers. And she's still adding another page of content for this new iteration of the paper, but it still stands for that upper level hierarchy proposal. And it is something I really want to get lots of feedback on. That's why I was thinking it would be a conference thing first. But anyway, maybe Magali, you and your team will
I would love to participate.
Okay.
Because, but I'm, as you know, I'm also think about this, but perhaps I'm not in the same context. But I would love to. I know the work by mechanism and by objective. I think it is a good thing. But I was just wondering how to connect with the existing thing. If we are already using some concepts. Yes.
I think all of those existing terms
you can map to the new one.
I don't think we have to mint and deprecate any of the existing terms, but some of them will be hollowed out, and we'll just rely on inference ideally to populate them again.
Okay.
We're gonna do. We might talk about this later, but we have plans to do a lot of crazy rebooting of FoodOn stuff and populating by inference, or at least I do, and I hope Damien's on board.
You bet. And that totally, Troy, to your question, anytime we talk about inference, it means they're good axiomatizations that actually are a modeling that will stick in place and be useful every day, all the time when we hit the reasoner and regenerate button.
Cool. All right, that's all for me for now. Thanks.
Okay. So then I think there's some parthood for me anyway. The latest animal question was about wholer parts and actually naming animal parts. So Anusha and Kai, could you give Magali a show of that, where we're at, and focus on this animal parts thing? And I just saw I got an email from Anders Mahler about how to define meat and meat tissue. So I'll send that around to you guys too. I haven't read it fully, so I can't talk about it. But
yeah, Kai, do you mind sharing your screen so you can also talk through other steps as well?
Sure. Yeah. So how do we want to do this, Anusha? Do we want to show because I want to show the demo of the compiled version, but that doesn't have everything in it. And I think we should show, sorry, I didn't compile well, I'm not going to apologize for work. It would have been awesome. There's awesome things to show. So we have been working. So Anusha, I'll just summarize and then, sorry, I'm very excited about this. Okay. So Anusha and I have been working, and Anusha's done a really amazing job of building out these robot templates to deal with a lot of different things like plant crossings with, different plant parts versus plants. Now we're working on anatomical parts versus animals. And she's been doing all this work and kind of coming at this from a perspective of like, I want to maximize everyone's time here. I was proposing that we do something along the lines of like taking some of the structure that Anusha had been creating and kind of templatizing it so that it could be even more automated than we've currently been doing. So we kind of came to this idea of we'll take following the patterns Anusha has been doing for the plant versus, or the animal versus body part hierarchy. If we could take that and template it out and then auto-populate robot templates from scratch or from script, so that essentially we would have basic templates that say like, okay, here's like animal organ wholer parts, animal heart, animal blah blah blah, and then we run a series of alls that we might want to have the terms for the heart and the organ, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been working on that, and there's some things that we wanted to settle in the hierarchy, and then I can give a demo of the fully automated system that allows us to kind of boot up a robot template from this template pattern, if that makes sense. Sorry if I'm going. Does that make sense, everyone? Am I being understood?
Yeah, and between the animal
Cool.
template
Great.
and plant food product template, we will actually be finally in a FoodOn 1.0 position, because that's exactly what I wanted to get it to, more systematic treatment of both of these things. And I'm just turning off my video because we were just getting a little bit of a blocky video from your side, Kai.
Okay, so great. Okay, so should I turn my, okay, I think my,
Yeah, your sound and video are a bit halting, so this might help.
okay, maybe Anusha, do you want to share first? Sorry, while my internet's not working, and then.
Sure. If you want me to share something specific, maybe I can share otherwise the robot table where we
Yeah,
wanted to get.
show the template, and then we can talk about our questions, and then when my internet's better, I'll do the demo.
Sure, just a second. Okay. So are you talking about this template or the one which we have in the robot table? This is the
I guess both.
template.
I guess we could actually, maybe you can start with the PowerPoint version because it's
Okay,
maybe simple. However you want to do this, because this
that's fine.
isn't exactly the most up-to-date one. But we wanted to, so
Yeah.
from the group, we would like to get feedback on the pattern, and if it makes sense, and if there's any expertise that you guys can provide to make it better.
Yeah, I think Damien, you had some suggestion for the animal part that maybe we should switch to animal tissue part. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. But we can get to that later.
Okay.
Just give Magali and Troy the intro.
Okay, so yeah, I think that this was already developed with the feedback from Magali, because I think
Okay.
and so we shared this, I think, in the last FoodOn curation meeting. So I guess that this part was finalized. So following this template, now we have created this animal template where we have started with adding these animal general terms, like suppose animal whole, and then it will be substituted with all other organisms, like with other animals. And now we are kind of populating this table. So there are many questions definitely where I am not exactly sure about if, so maybe we can discuss those, or if Kai, you have any specific thing to ask, then maybe we can go ahead with that.
Yeah, so the long and short was that we've kind of, maybe let's go through like this, use heart as an example or something like that, where we kind of explain it. So for example, okay, so the superclass is animal organ, wholer parts, and then for any individual body part, so in this case organ, it could also be like forelimb, it could be leg, hip, shoulder, whatever. But any animal X body part, wholer parts, we kind of have this pattern where we have heart or X organ part, wholer raw. So sorry, let me preface this. X animal, the animal in brackets, so X animal, X or Y uberon anatomical part. So like any animals, any part, whole or parts, and then that thing raw, whole, and whole raw. So that's one of those sub patterns. And within that, I mean, we could talk about like the specific axioms, or we could talk about a bit higher level stuff. I'm not sure what would be best to focus on. I could show an example of this being deployed if you want, but maybe we can talk about this template a little more first. Is there anything, Damien, that you wanted us to highlight? Like, do you want us to go from the top maybe, or?
Yeah, I guess a few things. So we know that we can turn off any one of these rows for any particular organism, like beef or cantaloupe or bear. And the whole, but we have one general animal hierarchy that will be in play. In other words, all of these rows that you see here will have a class called animal as the most general class. So say we don't cover every one of the 300 four-legged creatures on the planet that are used for food. We'll still be able to mention exactly an animal heart, whole parts, or animal whole parts raw, and derives from some, and then the name of that animal. So that's the base level that we're offering out. But then this system is going to pre-compile all cattle, say, and all lamb and all goat permutations or combinations on this of the animal template against those organisms. So now the question becomes, how detailed do we want all of these options? And I can see covering it for each of the organs. But if you stretch further down into the 100th item on this template.
So I've got an initial reaction to that, if I may. I think what you're, if I just describe it with slightly different terms, you're laying out a framework here where there are rows in this table for different components, if you will, with increasing levels of granularity as you go down. So you have whole beast up above and little tiny piece of a skin down below. And then you've got along the horizontal axis over to the right, different kinds of animals, by species, genus, what have you, right?
Yeah.
And the question is, how many cells of that matrix do we take the time to auto-generate? I think the ideal, sort of conceptually, imagine if we we don't just say yes or no for each cell of that matrix. We have usually not, usually, and always. Yeah, because there's going to be exceptions to every rule. I think we can organize the rows of this table and the columns out to the right in such a way that you've got that the cells gradually get less and less populated. They get populated with less and less frequency as you go down and to the right. In other words, we can sequence the genuses according to food utility and have things like camels much less useful than birds, for example. And we can sequence the rows according to utility because there are some organs and some portions of things that are more food relevant. And so what we're doing is we're doing sort of two kind of dimensional prioritization exercises, which then can be inferred or sort of projected over the whole darn framework. That's, I think, how I would tackle this.
Yeah, that's not a bad suggestion. I think we also want to keep in mind that this is like a templatable pattern within a templatable pattern that generates a template, which generates an ontology. So there's a lot of levels to this.
Exactly. So here's the simple version of what I just said. Pick the starting in column L, pick the columns here, which is sort of like a genus, I think, or a family, animal
Roughly, it's
family.
some phylogenetic grouping. Yeah.
Yep, and divide it into ones that we generally should focus on and ones we generally shouldn't. So just do a sort of, you know, a two-way split there, a two-way tiering, and then the same thing with the rows, and then you'll get basically, you know, 2 by 2 off to the right in the cells in terms of categorization, you know, 4 levels of granularity, and that'll give you pretty strong rules of thumb. I think it'll get you 80-20.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, Kai, just for a moment, just scroll all the way over to the left slowly,
Yeah, sure. I
or
can do
right
that.
slowly, and
Yes.
you will
So
see how many different taxa, just, you know, rule of thumb there are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So 3/4 of these, we're not even going to hardly touch them, other than just whole animal.
So the thing is, when we look at these things, we're immediately assuming sort of a North American uh,
Yeah.
Western
I
diet,
I did my
whereas
best to not do that. So when I made these categories.
right. No, I just mean to Troy's question about how detailed we would be with some of these animals against the animal row matrix. We're assuming we want all the bits and pieces of cattle because it's so common in the Western diet, but that we wouldn't really care about the same level of detail for moose. But that's speaking to a bias towards what we can go see in our own shopping market rather than Nunavut's shopping market, or some shopping market in China, or some other place that has
Yeah.
different
So
animals.
right, and the way that I think is best to get around this cultural bias without having a ton of time to talk to a whole bunch of people from around the world and see what all everyone eats is to that would be ideal, but not having the time to do that, really to treat it as pairing parts with species, just in a general sense. But you're right, like that'll create like turtle hearts, turtle liver, you know. But yeah, so some categorization and simplification is needed, as you suggest.
Right. Well, what I was winding around to is at the moment, Kai allows any particular row to be turned on or off for any particular animal that we get to list in another file. And so this was our short-term evolutionary strategy to detail for the areas that we know, such as cattle, goat, and sheep, which parts need to show up in FoodOn just to cover our own diet knowledge, but that the system is totally open to adding more animals and detailing which other rows of the template we want for those animals, such that they're also generated to the level we want in the FoodOn file.
And we were going to kind of do it roughly by these categories. So for example, with Avis, but I like your idea of having the 2 categories like within Avis. So like the birds that are commonly eaten versus, you know, maybe things like quail or pigeon, which are not as commonly eaten, at least in the West.
Yeah, but the question is, what does that do? Because we're just talking about the turning on or off of class entities that appear in FoodOn. So
Right.
there's
I mean,
no,
is it the worst thing to have like, you know, so we're talking about like chicken, whole parts, chicken, whole chicken disc, chicken, that, but is it bad to have more or less the same thing with ostrich and pheasant and pigeon and squab, or maybe squab is a pigeon, whatever, but quail and turkey? Is it wrong to have I don't think it's wrong to have all of them, assuming that they're all anatomically correct, that, you know, all avis have these parts. Like we're not going to put wings on, you know, bovid, but avis get wings, for example. So as
yeah,
long as it's not like wrong in that sense.
no, it's not wrong, but um, it's
Doesn't it create a lot of dead weight we have to carry around? Just
yeah,
sort of bloating the owl file?
that it is. And so now we have to talk about the users, whether the users are overwhelmed by these other levels of choice. It's certainly big. It's like
Here, can I do the can I share?
mhm.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, so I'll just demo here. So here's the demo with can you all see my screen?
Yep.
So here's just a subset. So it's just some of the rows in the template with the top level animal and then 3 species. So antelope, bear, and chicken, just ABC because why not? Anyway, so the hierarchy kind of looks something like this. So we'd have animal food product at the top, and then under that animal whole or parts, and then animal whole raw, et cetera, et cetera. And then not all of this is, the axioms aren't quite all 100% validated and verified, so it might not everything in here is right. It's just compiling, which is, so at least it's working at the moment. But we're able to, you know, so we have things like, okay, so under animal whole, we've got like, you know, all 3 versions of the, you know, so all of these species are subsuming under animal whole. So like chicken whole, bear whole, antelope whole, etc. will all subsume under animal whole. And then you can also find that class separately. So like, so for example, chicken whole, chicken food product, chicken whole or part, chicken whole is also here. And so it is, and with ontologies, we allow for multiple inheritance. Things can have multiple parents, which is good, which is correct. It can be a little confusing for people when searching, but it is technically correct. So yeah, so chicken whole or chicken part, just drilling down into these hierarchies. So we've got like things like chicken muscle tissue, which is kind of like chicken meat, chicken organ whole parts. And here's kind of the hierarchy we were showing. So chicken whole parts, chicken heart raw, chicken heart whole raw, and chicken heart. Anyway, so this kind of pattern gets a little big, right? When we have, because we have all of these variations, whole parts, raw, etc. It does get quite large. So
Kai?
Yeah, please.
Just a background question for me. At some point, as a cook, the version of chicken I care about is something like breast or drumstick. That kind of thing, like drumstick. I just want to check. We don't any longer consider that a part of chicken in this sense. We consider it a chicken food product, right?
Yeah, we need to figure out if it's gonna go, if we're gonna have drumstick be a synonym for like.
I guess what I'm getting at is the taxonomy you just showed us. Is it supposed to end at anatomy, scientifically describing the animal and parts of it, or does it also go into things that are food ingredients, or do we make a is that where we draw the line here?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, Damien, can you answer that, or Anusha?
I think we should draw the line there, by the way. Like, I think this should be sort of how can I describe it? A zoologist's description of the animal, not yet the chef's description or a butcher's description.
Okay, so there are with plants, it's a little bit more clear cut. We're using the plant ontology, and it's.
Oh, but wait a minute. I'm sorry. We're already in animal food product. We're not in animal here. No, sorry. Then thigh and breast has to be in here somewhere.
Yeah, because this is like any chicken organ. This is like any chicken muscle tissue, any chicken heart, etc.
Yeah.
So there is a mixture of anatomical and culinary. We have a thing called culinary animal whole parts. I think where is it? Do we?
Yeah, but this is not really. We're not trying to capture anatomy here in this totality. So breast meat would have to reside somewhere under chicken muscle tissue because it's an animal food product.
Right.
We would not have in here, for example, chicken blood vessel. That exists scientifically, but it's not relevant in a food sense. So we're not trying to do the complete anatomy. We're just doing the anatomy as relevant for food.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the thinking. And there's a lot of anatomical parts, like, you know, like that end up, you know, being eaten, like all sorts of like pancreas.
Sure. If someone eats it, it's eligible to go in here. Whether we put it in here really comes down to how often people eat it. And I think this is my point back to Damien, when you say, like, you know, how do we avoid Western bias? There has to be some threshold for relevance. It doesn't need to be relevance only in the Western world, but if nobody eats chicken toenails, they only eat chicken feet, then that's as low as we're ever going to go at most, at least until someone asks for it.
Yep. Now, if what I did spot was that there was a crossing of ground this and ground that in the template, just being entertained, I think. And so we have to draw the line there because somewhere, somehow, because yes, indeed, any particular thing can be ground and turn up in a hot dog. But I don't know. I don't know if we really want to cross ground with all of those frozen, uncooked. We have been asked to do, though, however,
Yeah.
ground lean, ground fatty, and so on. So, just to say, I think there was a little bit of a mechanism so far to, like, for example, have animal part for the egg line appear only for aves and not for any of the others. So we recognize that table we were just looking at has sections of it that pertain to only kinds of animal and would never show up in other areas.
Yes.
But
So,
there
yeah,
is
so
no, sorry, but as far as I understand, you speak about aves, that's birds, and there's also other kind of eggs in the world.
right,
Let's say snakes
absolutely.
or turtle or
Yeah, no. Yeah, absolutely. And I
so,
actually made quite a long list of things that I got really interested in that question. And I actually came up with like a big old list of these things that I don't know if this is relevant to this conversation, but like honey is bee vomit, celiac is like male lac bug, the ambergris is like, bile duct. There's a lot of other bodily food products that there's more than we think. I made a list of a bunch of them.
Wonderful. Yeah, I got
yes,
exposed
but how
just for
can
fun, because I
we,
thought that was really cool. But
just a question to follow what Troy was saying. If I understand, you think we can decide if it is useful or not to add some animals regarding their utility or your usage, if they are edible or not. And I don't understood what you said about usually yes, usually not, because I think in an ontology it must be always true. And so I can't imagine how we can decide if it is edible or not
Yeah.
all
So
around the world, you know?
yeah, no, I hear you, Magali. And by the way, I didn't say is it edible, like is it possible to be eaten? I said is it eaten? Now, does it tend to happen? Which is an even more complicated question than the one you led. But let me back up a little bit. I think broadly what we're talking about here is there are two philosophies potentially at play. The one is in this table we have the computer populate all the columns times all the rows because why not? They all exist, or at least
Yes.
or wherever they actually physically exist, right? If mammals don't have eggs, well then whatever. But for all reptiles, all fish, all insects, etc., then do it. That's one method, right? Do it because it is true, and why not? Unlimited computing power. The other philosophy is to populate this according to what is likely to be used in our ontology and create the space to add things upon request or upon further processing power or upon further need. So and it's not a judgment around what should be in. It's a practical decision around what is worth the processing power to load and maintain and so forth. That's what
I wouldn't say that processing power is the issue. I would say it's more like people processing the amount of information is the issue.
Exactly. In the broadest term, just
yeah.
accessibility, usability, readability, understandability, explainability, storage, etc. Right? If I happen to do a study where some people are eating emu, and I want to find emu, but there's as much detail about emu as there is about cow in here, I might not appreciate that as an emu user. I might not feel that you've been culturally sensitive. I might feel that you just spread the fire hose on me of data.
So, yeah, I like your characterization, Troy. There's one thing to say about this whole templating thing. What I was proposing is that this generates the the scaffold and the individual classes. We assign FoodOn IDs to those that we accept should be in FoodOn. And then we make it a compilation program that this is merged. Anytime you hit the button on this system, it's merged with an existing hierarchy, 99%, which is from the previous iteration of this, but allows for extra custom entries under any animal food product, bear food product, or whatever class, for those items which are common or which are rare, but which we still want to include. And the press button generation hasn't generated those items. So over time, this always provides the minimum framework, but that we can have any kind of custom entry underneath it. And that allows us to take the pressure off detailing every case in this table. But it, what's the word? But it means we have to go and question whether we really need 200 rows on this, or whether we can take those stray cases and just pop them in manually, enhance the minimum class structure with other ones that are maintain their IDs over time as well.
Right, just to be clear, what the way that we're setting this up is we can filter this way, where we say like, okay, egg food product, this will be true for avis, but it will be false for bovidia. And then we also have a separate system to turn it off for specific species. So like, let's say we, for some reason in this example, we don't care about emu eggs for whatever reason, we could turn that off if needed in this instance of the population that gets merged into FoodOn, as Damien was explaining.
Oh, that's great.
And just to add, I mean, so this template is already based on the requests which are coming from USDA. So yeah, I think most of the animals we have already covered, which have been requested from USDA.
Right, and this is to comprehensively hit what's in SR, the legacy of USDA, but USDA has more foods, and USDA is interested, I can speak as a USDA employee, we're interested in having more foods in the future too, because we recognize that our database is limited. And so I'm trying to help future-proof this as well.
Practically speaking, I think what's also going to happen, you fast forward 3 years in the future, there's someone who comes along and they forget or they don't know that there's a template or whatever. They're going to look at the exemplar of the most detailed, so now all of a sudden I do want to recognize emu eggs. I first go to chicken or duck and I see where the chicken egg is, and then I clone that same structure for emu, just so I'm following what apparently is best practice, because you'd like best practice to be used, of course, on your most detailed thing, and then, like you're saying, sort of shut off the branches for things that are less common. And so practically speaking, so long as we do chicken and cow and tuna correctly, then the format will be there for others to follow, so long as they're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my thinking too, is that we focus on those species like that are very common within Western diets, and we make sure that those are all on, and that we've generated sufficient rows in this template to thoroughly cover them. Like there's going to be a lot of example, like for cow parts, there's a lot of examples, right? There's all the ribs and all, there's just a lot of stuff for cow cuts, for example, but that we kind of like don't do it as thoroughly. So like with bovidia, which, like maybe we do it very thoroughly for cow and like buffalo or something, but maybe less so for like, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly which species we want to do it with less with, like maybe gazelle, but we don't have to do it as thoroughly with gazelle as we do for cow and sheep or something.
Yeah, I mean, I am imagining a pretty elegant conceptual diagram, Kai, where one can show along the horizontal axis the sort of Pareto of animals. Cow and chicken are at the one end, and spiders at the other end. And then along the vertical axis, it's the Pareto of attributes, grouped roughly by category. So you got all the organs in one thing, you got all the tissue cuts in another, for example, with more common ones up high, less common ones down low. And then you could show people, it's not exactly like this, people, but broadly speaking, this is what we chose to populate first. And I think people would get that in a minute, just to be able to weigh in on whether the left to right and the top to down prioritization seems matching their expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of how we're trying to organize this. Like, I mean, Anusha and I have only been working on this template for like a couple weeks, so it's not there yet, but that's roughly what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. It's cool.
Anyone else? Anusha, did you want to chime in, or anyone else?
I think that we've already getting short of time, but there are many things, so I'm not sure if we are having next FoodOn Curation meeting. If yes, then maybe we can continue discussing this. Damien, do you have what's your plan for the next meeting?
No plan. Yeah, let's continue talking about each of the issues. And yeah, the animal part and versus animal tissue part or animal muscle part would be a good and a super needed topic. Right away, maybe we could even start an issue on that, or just add it to the animal parts template issue.
Okay, right. Okay, and I think that's a good idea because it's good to have feedback from everyone, and it's always extremely helpful. So yeah, thank you so much, Troy, Maggie, Emma, everyone. So yeah, okay, let's do that.
Okay, and Magali, you just said I agree with both approaches, but I prefer the second strategy. Now I've forgotten what the second strategy was. So
it was just what Troy was suggesting, that it's to populate on demand or on priority, you know, not to have the template which will allow to populate all the things, but to concentrate on the most used or eaten food.
Okay.
And thank you for the clarification. It's very useful to me to understand what how robot template should work, and axiomatization also. And yes, Anusha, it will be nice to follow with issues, because I'm usually read them, and so sometimes I can't reply because I have no idea. But if I can help, I will try to.
Okay, perfect. Because we have already opened an issue for discussing the grouping things for animals, like animal parts. So maybe it would be great to have your feedback over there as well.
For sure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, folks. Let's meet in 2 weeks then, just before Christmas, and try to put this in the hoop.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kai.
Yeah, thanks, Anusha. Thanks, Damien.
Bye, folks.
Thank you.